Renewing minds.
Renewing minds.
Renewing minds. Out from the street, restoration project. We do believe restoration project. That there is hope. Restoration project. We won't let go. Restoration project, building our community, giving hope and healing always. Those who come and have a heart, are building and helping, loving people's plans. Future bright,
Welcome to the Renewing Mind Show. I am Dana Rose, the Vice President for Family Restoration Project One. We are here in the studio along with the CEO, Arthur Rose, and we are your hosts for today's segment of Renewing Minds. For those of you that are tuning in for the very first time, the Family Restoration Project One, we are committed to reducing crime and the ever-escalating fiscal impact on the state of New York as well as Westchester County. In our broadcast, we will introduce consciousness. We will also introduce and bring insight to many issues concerning our urban neighborhoods in which we live. We identify problems, and not only problems, but practical solutions in many areas ranging from education, incarceration, recidivism, healthcare issues, as well as domestic violence. We come to you bi-weekly with one goal: to inform, to inspire our viewers. With that said, today's topic is rethinking approaches to justice reform. Arthur Rose.
Professor Terrance Coffie is a 2017 graduate of the New York University Silver School of Social Work, where he earned both his bachelor's and master's degrees in the field of social work with a focus in criminal justice reform. As an advocate, as an activist, as an educator, Terrance has committed himself to creating social and political change within the criminal justice system. He is an adjunct professor at New York University Silver School of Social Work, where he teaches forensic justice and problem-solving course. He also is the founder of Educate, Don't Incarcerate, which is a grassroots organization that raises awareness surrounding criminal and juvenile justice reform. He also is the president and founder of the Social Justice Network, an internet broadcast that highlights the voices, the lives, and experiences of those with justice involvement, where he hosts his weekly talk show, It's Coffee Time. He's been published in the USA Today regarding reentry and voting rights for the formerly incarcerated. Through his efforts, he also has gained the support of famed activist Michelle Alexander, the author of the New York Times bestselling book, The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. He is currently in the process of producing the documentary Caged Roses that focuses on the juvenile justice system in America. I introduce to our viewers today Terrance Coffie, Professor Terrance Coffie. Hi, Terrance.
How we doing, Reverend Rose? I'm super excited to be here on Renewing Minds to have these conversations. And I want to thank you, you guys, for inviting me here to share with your audience on the work that's being conducted, as well as the work that's being set forth by the Family Restoration Project.
Terrance, criminal justice reform. Let's just get right into the heart of the matter. What do you believe are the key goals right now of the criminal and justice reform in New York State?
Our primary objective, as you mentioned, is to reduce mass incarceration for nonviolent offenders as well as others, because that definition of violent offenders has been redefined, particularly as it relates to criminal activity in Black and Brown communities. So that's one of the areas I think is critical for us to begin to look at. And how we do that is by reevaluating the sentencing guidelines that have led to mass incarceration, and exploring alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders. So, for example, just yesterday, the United States Sentencing Commission just voted 4-3 to retroactively look at those cases of first-time offenders and nonviolent offenders that make up nearly 50% of our incarceration, not only here in New York State, but also throughout the country. So those are some of the policies, and one that we can begin to look at as to how do we begin to look at that. And that one piece of legislation at the federal level is going to impact over 7,000 men and women who will be coming home next year and in the coming years based upon that. Additionally, one of the other things that we look at is that our reform efforts should address the racial disparities as it relates to our criminal legal system here in America. I think that there's no way for us to escape, as you just mentioned, when we look at the studies and research related to our criminal legal system, how that is impacted, how those policies impact Black and Brown communities. For example, Black and Brown folks are 5 times more likely to be sentenced for some nonviolent offense to 5 or more years. Again, Black and Brown folks are 6 times more likely to be sentenced to federal prison for crack cocaine or drug offenses as it relates to our white counterparts for the same amount of drugs, particularly as it relates to powder cocaine. Again, juveniles, particularly Black and Brown, and we have to be very realistic and clear on this. Our youth are 8 times more likely to be sentenced to juvenile facilities for the same offenses as their white counterparts. So when we begin to look at areas such as that, I think it's critically important that we do have a space that we can begin to collectively begin to address some of these. And when I say collectively, this is an inclusion of law enforcement. This is an inclusion of our district attorney's offices. This is an inclusion of stakeholders, community service providers, particularly organizations such as the Family Restoration Project, Social Justice, and a host of others, that we come together and begin to address some of these critical issues and readdressing how we can begin to reduce this impact. Not only here in New York State, but we begin with New York State. Because my mama used to always say, you got to take care of home before you can go abroad. So those are some of the areas when we begin to look at that. And additionally, and I think this will be my last point, it's important that we begin to reemphasize the importance of placing rehabilitation over punishment as our first option. I think that in the past, what has led to what we know now as mass incarceration is that there was this movement that really focused on the idea of punishment without taking in consideration the totality of the communities and the individuals that were involved in criminal behavior. And again, I want to make this perfectly clear to our listening audience that when we look at the total impact, particularly right here in New York State, if we want to start there, the majority, 67% of the men and women who are incarcerated in our prisons here in New York State are individuals who have been incarcerated for low-level offenses. This is part of the conversation when we talk about broken window laws that were enhanced in Black and Brown communities that led to the over-incarceration of what we're seeing here, not only in New York State, but across the country. So I think by providing a more educational and vocational trainings, organizations going into our correctional institutions and providing these opportunities for those individuals that are incarcerated, we better prepare ourselves for their return back to society. And those are just a few areas I think that we can begin to look at. 70 93% of the cases of individuals that are incarcerated, not only in New York State, but throughout the country, are done through plea bargaining. Plea bargaining is utilized at the highest level with, guess who? I guess everyone knows, Black and brown communities, particularly poor Black and brown communities. For a lot of these individuals who are, who, when we think about plea bargaining, we have to remember, if I'm coming from a poor community and I'm in an over police community, and then I'm arrested in that space, when you get me in court, my main objective, if you've been where I've been, I just want to go home.
Yes.
The use of plea bargaining by the public defender's office has been one that, for better or worse, or what they hope to say, that only keeps the flow of the criminal justice system going. That's it. I do think you made a valid point. Public defenders' offices from across the country have shared that being underfunded, understaffed, under everything, and yet one public defender may have a caseload of 300 people in the course of a day. When you have a state attorney's office that has a limited budget to exercise within this space. So again, this goes back to how we're going to have conversations and discussions surrounding this. So you made a valid point. There have been some conversations. I think that what the Family Restoration Project is doing, even in this conversation today with your audience, is that now we're raising awareness around this. I think there are a lot of wonderful public defenders out there who have the greatest intentions, but they will share with you the expansive caseloads for one individual, and trying to keep a criminal justice system where it becomes a mechanism where what they're trying to do is try to plead the best way they can. So I think that there are a lot of things that we can look at, because if we're going to talk about equal justice and equity in justice, then that means there's a responsibility of our society, of our government, to ensure that those who are criminally charged have the best representation, the same way that we see this happening in prosecutorial practices.
Now, I was thinking about the concern for our younger population, the juveniles. And of course, and our audience may know, we work with the youth from the ages of 12 years old to 21 in our local communities. And we have implemented the Credible Messenger Initiative. That's a transformative mentoring of the young individuals, intensive youth development model. We work very closely with them. And one of the core elements to this approach is the belief that communities are best positioned to respond to the needs of youth, given the opportunity and the resources. And we know that community safety is a shared goal with most of us. But unlike the adult court system, as mentioned, the juvenile justice system, it does not recognize punishment as legitimate purpose rather than a stated goal to help our young people our goal is to avoid future delinquency, and even that they may mature in society, become abiding adults. That will reduce recidivism, and then we can also allow them to grow into healthy individuals that are productive in their community. So when we look at the juvenile justice system, we see so many youth involved in these court hearings, and it's really, they're falling deeper and deeper into a state of no return. So what I want to say, the communities, they play a primary role in preventing juvenile delinquency in our communities, criminal victimization as juveniles, federal and state leadership, and support of our communities can successfully change the trajectory of this. So with that said, one of my questions to you, Dr. Coffie, is how does New York State address the needs of our juvenile offenders within our justice reform efforts?
Part of the work that we're doing with Michelle Alexander on our documentary Caged Roses, where we're looking at the the social and societal impact of our criminal legal system in the lives of Black and Brown children. And I am going to say that again, children. I think that initially what we all have to, even before we get to the juvenile justice system, before we get to our criminal legal system, before we get to the data that shows that young Black children, if they have one contact with the criminal legal system, they are 8 times more likely to go on to adult criminal justice system. That's one thing. But let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about community policing and the way our children are first viewed. Policy in and again, there is no way for us to have a legitimate conversation surrounding criminal and juvenile justice reform in America, in New York State, or wherever you want to go, without acknowledging the narrative that was first created in 1994 with the legislation being passed by the Clinton administration under the 94 crime bill. When one Hillary Rodham Clinton stated and made the statement in regards to our young Black and Brown children as super predators. You have, from that point, you have already written a narrative that strikes fear, intimidation, et cetera, into a community, into a nation where then president, and again, this is my love-hate relationship with the Biden-Harris administration that your audience can find in my Forbes magazine article. It was the then senator that stood on Congress floor that advocated for the passage of the 94 crime bill, that he stated that they are like animals running the streets. I am not going to let them bust your mother or my mom upside the head. Who do you think that they were talking about? All we got to do is see, these are this type of language, because it was the us versus them. It was and again, I think it's important for our audience to understand that criminality in the United States at the height of, let me do this first. My mama used to always say, you got to know where you came from and know how you got to where you're at first. So we can understand every piece of policy that's happening. We have to understand where that derived from. And that derived from 1994 when then Senator Joseph R. Biden advocated for this legislation and referred to our communities and our children as beyond the pale, unsavageable. We're not going to invest, et cetera, et cetera. Then was the adoption of the over-policing in our communities. Then there was the adoption of our schools becoming military camps or prison camps. Then it became, there were no longer case managers or case workers in our schools. There were policemen. And we've seen this in our schools today. Our children, for an infraction of any other child just happening in any little Bobby on the east side, our children could commit the same offenses. And these offenses are not the offenses. We're talking about skipping school. We're talking about a schoolyard fight. We're talking about all these things. Our children are then arrested and incarcerated at higher rates than any other group that we're discussing as it comes to juvenile justice. So let's just set the framework so we understand. I'm in full agreement with everything you're mentioning, Sister Rose and Reverend Rose. I am full agreement. But what I am very clear on, unless we begin to address the social and systemic aspect of this, then everything else we're seeing is just playing out, which now leads to what we refer to as the school to prison pipeline. The greatest number of arrests that are taking place in our communities are happening in our schools because our children are being suspended, expelled, and arrested at higher rates than any other group across the boards. The research and study has shown. So now that I got all that out of the way, I think that one of the things that, because the first thing we have to do is dismiss the idea that our children are animals and see our children as just children. First of all, that's the first thing that has to happen. The second thing that has to happen is that just like in every other space, we have to begin to look at our children through a more a comprehensive and holistic lens and account of the environmental, cultural, and environmental factors that shape them in the communities that they're in. Thirdly, what we definitely have to do is take a more rehabilitative as opposed to a punitive approach to our children and providing the necessary resources that they need to be able to navigate not only through life, but through education, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the most important things that cannot be missed, particularly from a judicial perspective, there has to be a recognition of the developmental differences of a child and an adult. Because for our children, and unfortunate, our children are faced as youth as seen as adults. We have seen this from law enforcement reports that look at our children and say, oh, they're much older, they're much harder, all these things that shape how law enforcement engages with our students, with our children. Also, how the courts engage with our community. So it's critically important that we begin to look at how we begin to look at those differences in the developmental aspect of it. Also, again, to redivert them from traditional courts to intervention courts, to intervention community-based organizations that take an active role with our district attorney's office, with law enforcement, with our community stakeholders, that being a part of what we like to refer as community courts. This is part of my initial work at New York University through my course, my graduate level course of forensic justice and problem solving courts. What we do is that we look at the individual, particularly youth, from a holistic. We have to take in every aspect of that child's life when we find them in these spaces. And then, as you mentioned, Sister Rose, that we begin to initiate programs and interventions that steer them away from criminal behavior and activity, because at the root of this, now this is where most people really get pissed off with me, but that's okay. We still have the systemic issues of poverty. We still, the hood. What do you think happens in these communities when I walk out as a child and it's saturated with drugs, it's saturated with poverty, it's saturated what do you think I adopt to? What do you think? Our children are attempting to survive the environments in which they exist. Maladaptive behaviors are adopted as the norm because what they're attempting to do is normalize their experience by surviving their environment. You know you got to be down, Reverend Rose. You know you got to. We somehow look at our communities and our children from a very different lens based upon our lived experience. Our children do not walk to school with mommy and daddy holding them the hand. Hey, we're going to drop off with soccer mom and soccer dad and all of that stuff. Where I work at and the work that we're vested in, these children are walking through some very crime-ridden neighborhoods. They see the prostitution. They see the drugs. They know the gunplay. Isn't it striking? Is anyone concerned that our children can get killed in a park? Let's just stop there. I mean, anybody want to stop? Children going to the park, but we don't want to talk about the disinvestment of our city and local states that have not invested in YMCA's after-school programs, all these things to provide our children opportunities to develop themselves. And this is why the work of the Family Restoration Project becomes critical for our legislators, elected officials, and communities to invest in, to ensure that we're providing those spaces and opportunities for our children to develop, grow, and maturate into successful young men and women that become just as beneficial to our society and the development and the future of our communities. If we have a vested interest in the betterment of those individuals becoming productive members of our society, then we have a responsibility as a society, as a community, as an elected official to invest in programs that are invested in those communities and the ones that we are serving. And I say that again openly. I'm very clear on my position because we can't talk about rehabilitation without investing in rehabilitation.
You shared some viable information for all of our viewers, and we here at Family Restoration Project, we so appreciate your wealth of knowledge. We appreciate your expertise in the field. And also, just for our audience, we have an upcoming Reentry Symposium 2023, and we're going to be discussing criminal justice reform and more. And the caveat is we will have a keynote speaker, none other than yours truly, Dr. Terrance Coffie. So for those of you that are available, September 9th, 12 to 4, we'll be right in Westchester County, the Yonkers Riverfront Library. We can continue these conversations as we strengthen our communities. Who should attend? Community members, city council, law enforcement officers, officials, and mainly our youth that has been disenfranchised and even marginalized in communities. We will have resources there to help each and every one of them. So with that said, we are just so excited about the show today, and we must do a part 2, Dr. Coffie, because
I look forward to it.
So if Dr. Coffie, if you wouldn't mind, can you just share with our audience how they can reach you, if they want to look for you further, to maybe do some work for them, as well as just enlightenment?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sister Rose and Reverend Rose, for having me here today on Renewing Minds. This has been a tremendous conversation. I'm the founder of the Social Justice Network. I can be contacted at tcoffee@sjnus.org. Also, you can follow me on Apple, Spotify, and iHeart Radio. For my weekly podcast, it's Coffee Time with Professor Coffie. We will be kicking off season 3, in which we'll be having conversations surrounding these issues as it relates to our communities and our criminal legal system, where we talk power, politics, and the criminal justice system. Also, we have our show Sisters in Progress, which focuses on women in our criminal justice system, and Inside Out, which focuses on reentry here. So you can follow us on any of those platforms. Reach out to us at sjnus.org to learn more about our work, and we look forward to sharing with you and partnering with anyone, particularly our friends over at the Family Restoration Project.
Yes. Thank you so much to our audience for tuning into our broadcast today. Again, I am your host, Dana Rose, and we encourage you, write, email, call us, any suggestions or even comments. We would love to hear from our viewers. You can reach us at renewingmindsbx@gmail.com. That's renewingmindsbx@gmail.com. Or you can call us 914-309-5443 if you would like to be a guest on our show. We know that you also have valuable information that our communities need to hear. Until next episode, remember, renewing minds.
Renew